everybody. Welcome to our April History Talks. Thanks for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. My name is Olivia Moore, and I'm the Adjunct Curator for the Lacey Museum. I'm also joined by our Associate Curator, Felicia Rover-Cameron, who is moderating the virtual part of this presentation at the back of the room. We are very excited to have author Janine Gates with us for tonight's program. She will be presenting on her book, Saving the Nisqually Delta. For those of you here in person, as you already know, we'd really appreciate it if you sign in at the end of tonight's presentation if you haven't already done so. You can also use that form to sign up for our newsletter, and we can keep you posted about current updates. Before we begin tonight's presentation, I want to start with a land acknowledgement and some recent museum news. The Lacey Museum is on the ancestral land of the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek, including the Nisqually Indian tribe and the Squaxin Island tribe. We acknowledge and remember those tribal people not recognized today who were absorbed or relocated into other tribes for survival. We recognize the ancestors and their descendants who are still here. We recognize and respect the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek as the traditional stewards of this land since time immemorial, and their role today in taking care of these lands in perpetuity. We recognize and have the responsibility to call attention to the histories of dispossession, forced removal, and abridged treaty rights that have allowed our nation, state, and city to develop as they have today. We recommend that community members read the Medicine Creek Treaty of 1854. Please feel free to visit us at the museum to take part in our free craft program, Creativity Corner. This is free and for all ages. This month, we're painting wooden eggs, and next month, we're creating cherry blossom trees. Creativity Corner is open during our museum hours, which are Thursdays and Fridays, 11 till 3 p.m., and Saturday, 10 a.m. till 4 p.m. We would love to see you, or if you know anyone who you think would be interested, please invite them to join us at the museum. We also want to remind you that we are holding a special event on April 23rd from 5:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. called Sharing Our Food Stories. This is an oral history workshop with Window Seat Media. Join us for an evening of reflecting, sharing, and writing about our food traditions. Participants will learn tips for documenting and writing about their family's food history and stories. Bring an object that connects in some way to your food story. It could be a cooking utensil, a recipe card, an ingredient, or something else entirely. It's totally up to you. This workshop is offered in conjunction with our rotating guest exhibit, Stories of Food, Food as Story, curated by Window Seat Media, that is currently on display at the Lacey Museum and Cultural Centre through the end of April. And after that, they will be putting up a new exhibit, and we'll let you know about that when we have more information. For this event, there is limited space available, and registration is required to reserve your spot. So please make sure that you do that. And if you would like to register, there is a QR code on the screen right now. We can also put that back up at the end of tonight's presentation if you need more time to get that. Also, this year, Washington is commemorating America's 250th anniversary. And we are taking part in the statewide Out of Many One initiative, where museums partner with their communities to identify objects, images, or artwork that reflects the American experience. We have prepared a list of 10 items from our collection, and we need your help picking out your favorite item. Next week, we are going to be sending out the information in our newsletter and on social media about how you can vote. This can be done in person at the museum, in person at the next history talks, but we will also have various ballot boxes that will be around the city. We haven't confirmed the location of these just yet, but that will be included in the information when we send that out next week. And the 5 items that get the most votes will be displayed on exhibit at City Hall during the summer. So please keep an eye out for the information that will be released very soon, we promise. We're just working on finalizing that. And we really look forward to seeing what items you guys choose. And they'll be on exhibit, which is really exciting. We also hope that you'll join us next month for our last history talks of the program. I can't believe we're already there, but we are. And we will have local activist and co-founder of Capital City Pride, Anna Schlecht. Anna is going to share the history of how a small group of people brought pride to Olympia. And we really hope to see you all there. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker for this evening, Janine Gates. Janine Gates is an Olympia-based freelance journalist and photographer and a full-time caregiver for seniors and their families. She's lived in Olympia for over 40 years. After some state and legislative experience, Janine raised children and wrote more than 500 articles in 10 years for her community news blog, Little Hollywood. For 13 years, she was involved with the South Puget Environmental Education Clearinghouse, a nonprofit best known as Speech. She served as president and managing editor of its print publication, the South Sound Green Pages. Janine also spent 4 years as board secretary for the Olympia Historical Society and the Bigelow House Museum. Thank you for joining us tonight, Janine. I'll let you take over.
Well, thank you so much for being here tonight on a glorious evening. Oh my gosh. And then I heard there were about 50 or so out there online, so thank everyone, I know, for being there. Hey, all right. So I'd like to acknowledge any elected officials here, and I see former Lacey City Council members, Karen Frazier and John Halverson here tonight, so thank you for coming. Well, I began my self-employment journey just over 25 years ago, so my schedule could be flexible enough to take care of my grandpa and my children so they wouldn't have to go to daycare. For years, I was a member of the Lacey Chamber of Commerce, and I was chair of the Home-Based Business Committee. So I'm still self-employed, and now my grandchildren and I get to spend a lot of time together. So that's a little bit about me. I've always been a writer. Some of you have known me since my speech days. I hit the ground running when I went to Evergreen. I was the last student to actually interview former Governor Dan Evans when he was appointed senator when Scoop Jackson passed away. So I reminded him of that when I saw him in 2019. I was like, Governor Evans, I would be so honored if you wrote the foreword to my book. Yeah, and I shot my shot, right? You know, and he said, well, what's it about? And I told him, and he was thrilled. So that's how that came to be. So I am here to talk about this book that took me 6 years. I'd like to thank the Nisqually Delta Association, which is a 56-year-old nonprofit organization still in existence. And if it hadn't been for them and a whole lot of efforts by citizens, we wouldn't have the Delta that we do today. So we only have an hour, so I'll get moving here. So in the last 50 years or so, Thurston County, Pierce County, and the ports of Olympia and Tacoma and various entities each put forth multiple proposals to industrialize the Delta. Today, we know that having a healthy environment is vital for long-term economic strength, but how we get there is a different matter, right? So the natural beauty we have here in South Sound is definitely a draw, and that brings population growth. So there's a balance, and how we all come about that is something I know we all care about. And the Delta was once considered too small to save, and now 350,000 visitors visit the Nisqually Refuge each year, and it's bursting at the seams. So let's learn a little bit more about how this happened. I do like to acknowledge that we are on native land, and in this case, the bands that are now known as the Nisqually Indian tribe. My book really does begin and end with the tribes. Next. Thank you. I would go to Puget Sound partnership meetings just to hear Nisqually tribal elder Billy Frank Jr. speak. And in 2014, at the Hands-On Children's Museum, I remember him telling a story about a copper ore spill in the Nisqually River at McKenna in 1977. So when I came across newspaper articles about that in my research, I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, that was pretty significant. Next. So we do have a lot of newcomers to the area. So I don't like to assume that everyone knows where the Nisqually River starts. But it starts as a glacier on Mount Rainier and flows 78 miles through 3 counties to meet Puget Sound. And it's the only estuary in the country with its headwaters in a national park. So we're a national story, and I'm going to take this national with your help. Yeah. Next. This picture is from Mounts Road. The Delta is the culmination of a major river system, providing more than half the freshwater flow entering South Sound waters. 18 rivers drain into the Delta, and it maintains critical habitat for wildlife and salmon, including the Chinook salmon, needed, of course, to feed the southern resident killer whales. And these salmon spend about a month in our Delta, so we're doing our part. Next. So the Delta, as we know, has a long history of enduring threats, starting with the arrival of European settlers and later the railroads. It was actually Hank Adams who told me to start with the railroads, and I'm glad he did that because that did back up what I was initially thinking about for the book. The Medicine Creek Treaty was signed under this tree in 1854, ceding to the United States 2.5 million acres of the Nisqually watershed to the U.S. government. Next. So I took the picture on the left in just 2020, but it looks like it's an old-timey picture from 1919 when the Atlas Powder Dock was built. And it was a pier in Thurston County, built for the associated needs of explosives serving World War I, World War II, and the Korean War. And this is located in what is now northeast Lacey and Thurston County on the shores owned by Jubilee now. So the Nisqually River is the boundary between Thurston County and Pierce County, and like I do in the book, I'll be toggling between the two so you get a sense of just really how small the area is. But on the right, in 1912, the railroad was built on the Pierce County shoreline over the mouth of Squalichu Creek in what is now DuPont in Pierce County. So the distance between these two sites is about 5 miles as the crow flies. Next. So the Delta was spared from widespread industrialization because Tacoma was chosen as the terminus of the railroad, bypassing Olympia, much to the chagrin of a lot of boosters. But in 1904, Seattle attorney Alson Brown created a large commercial dairy farm and diked 1,000 acres. So these pictures were taken in the early 1900s. I have a lot of them, but I like this one because my grandson loves kale, and that's a kale field. Yep. And you'll recognize it. The twin barns are behind those trees, and this is the walk that we walk on today to get to the twin barns and beyond. So cows and chickens provided Olympia and Nisqually Valley residents with an abundance of food. It was huge with lots of employers, about 30 to 40 guys. And the food was fed everyone around here. And I like the second one because you can see Lure Beach in the background there. So fast forward to 1949, though, and it was the Port of Olympia that included the Delta in its formal comprehensive plan as a site of heavy industry and future port activities. They even had a name picked out for the site, and boosters envisioned a new city here called Puget City. Next. So Washington State got in on the action and offered use of the Delta to the U.S. Navy in 1957. And then, of course, what else happened? I-5. Yep. So at this time, there were about 20 individual property owners who owned property in the Delta, and they had ideas too. The one we're probably most familiar with is in the 1960s. The primary landowner, Robert Beber, wanted to transform his 700 acres at the mouth of the river into a landfill for the city of Seattle. So I go beyond that soundbite and really dug into the newspapers of the time. He suggested that after the flats were full, it would be prepared and ready for development. But after Nisqually Valley residents, about 20 of them got wind of the idea, and the media, as it was back then, quite robust. The project was killed. So that was the first flurry of voices that happened. Next. But it was in 1965 that the Port of Tacoma proposed to use the Delta as a 12-berth international shipping port, a sketch of which you see here. It was a very well-prepared plan created by the Port of Tacoma in preparation for a $135,000 grant to the feds called the Nisqually River Deep Draft Heavy Industrial Feasibility Study and Preliminary Design for Terminal. Yeah, what a mouthful. So the transcripts from these public hearings are amazing. And by the way, I did go through all 85 boxes at the Evergreen State College where these archives are. But this picture is from the Washington State Archives, and I unfolded it from a file, and it just kept on going. It was huge, covered a whole table, and I stood on a chair to take this picture from above until someone told me to get down. So that's the only picture I got of it. But pretty incredible. So from these hearings brought emerging voices. Next. And we all know and love our Margaret McKinney here of Olympia on the left, even in her 80s. She took up the fight to preserve the Delta, and when she passed away in 1969, her dear friend Flo Brody took up the fight on the right. And this is when the Nisqually Delta Association was incorporated as a nonprofit to preserve the Delta in 1970. They held events and fundraisers to cover the costs of attorneys, create and mail out a newsletter, and get word out. I like some of the posters from the Chambers Prairie Grange and an auction at the Olympia Ballroom with items donated by local luminaries at the time, raising thousands of dollars. Next. And I found this in Outdoor Life magazine from 1971. They fostered alliances, including with duck hunters, which is not all that odd at all, because the McAllister Rod and Gun Club in Thurston County and the Tacoma Duck Club in Pierce County owned a significant amount of land in the Delta. It's just a little cool local history there with the brewery. Next. So you knew I was leading up to something here. Yes, our Governor Dan Evans was a great guy for 12 years. He served. Local governments were on their own before any unified statewide land use agencies were created. And in 1966, he suggested the establishment of a Washington State Land Use Commission. So up to then, it was really a free-for-all. Luckily, some counties felt that the Delta should be retained as open space, but that didn't mean anything because there were plenty of other overlapping land use plans afoot, especially by the Port of Olympia and the Port of Tacoma. Tacoma called the Nisqually Delta a non-productive tideland area possessing all the characteristics necessary to make it the largest and best bulk handling terminal in the world. And I did go through all of their annual reports, and they kept that up until 1971, and then there was no mention of it in 72. So by that time, they just decided and realized that the tide was turning and concentrated on Commencement Bay. But there was quite I can get into this in the Q&A because I came prepared with, especially since Karen is here, and this is recent history. So I'll talk more about Thurston County, and which wasn't always on the right side of history, right? So next, before I delve too far into that. So if it hadn't also been for Evans, the Shoreline Management Act of 1971 wouldn't have been formed. Even though Nisqually's shoreline was designated as a shoreline of statewide significance, that too did not necessarily save the Delta from encroachment, and the challenges to the SMA were frequent. Next. All right. So in 1968, the Brown Farm was put up for sale as farming waned, and that started a significant land grab that had been really brewing for years. And in the 1970s, the Weyerhaeuser Company wanted to build a log export facility there. So this picture is from 1976 in the files at Evergreen of the first public hearing when they needed to announce their plans for the log export facility. So this pier, which is no longer there, this is DuPont in 1976, the pier was abandoned by then, and it was only 36 feet wide and 300 feet long. It was wooden. And so that would have been a far cry from what they had in mind. But it was the Nisqually Delta Association who took it to the Washington State Supreme Court twice, and that did not happen. I go into the book. Okay, next. So going decade by decade, I took this picture in 1988. I've been doing this a long time, and I come from a long line of photographers. My grandpa and my dad were both small plane pilots and aerial photographers, so I'd like to fly too. But I took this on purpose after Thurston County approved Weyerhaeuser Real Estate Company's master plan for Meridian Campus. You see Nisqually there in the upper right. So this was nothing in 1988 but trails and trees and a small cheese factory over there. So this is when things got fun, though, and the 80s also saw the creation of the Nisqually River Management Plan and the creation of the Land Trust and the Nisqually River Council, they all do a lot of work today. Next. So again, going decade by decade. In the early 1990s, Weyerhaeuser and what was then called Lone Star Northwest, now Cal Portland, which is a subsidiary of Glacier Northwest. You don't really need to remember that, but it matters. But it's a sand and gravel mining corporation seen here. They proposed in the same litany of ideas and concerns to redevelop the old wharf near Squalichu Creek in DuPont. And that too did not come to pass exactly like Lone Star wanted, because the Nisqually Delta Association stepped in with an alliance of organizations, and in 1994 came up with a plan to move the operations further from the refuge, and this is what we see today. From Anderson Island and at Lure Beach, you see this, but it is small, fairly quiet, and nothing like they had originally planned. So we'll be hearing about this more because now Cal Portland is wanting to expand its footprint, and a case is in front of the hearing examiner right now to determine whether or not they'll be allowed to do that. And there's a lot of permit processes that need to go through. But this DuPont pit was originally mined about 135 years ago. And what's driving it is population growth, right? So this features a unique geological deposit of very hard gravel left over from the Ice Age. And that's why we're so special here. Next. So I'd like to thank and acknowledge a lot of folks who helped me with the book, including Janet Dawes. I was the recipient of many of her files that were absolutely meticulous. I couldn't have done what I did, but I also took her advice, and she passed away a couple of years ago. I interviewed about 25 folks that are in the book, and I'm just really honored to acknowledge and talk about their legacies. And some of folks spent their whole 40 years, to the Nisqually Delta. Next. And next is George Walter, who also took me on my first trip to Tatsolo Point and Squalichu Creek. I raised my kids at Nisqually, of course, and the 5 Mile Dike that we all love and miss. That's for the salmon. But I didn't know about Squalichu Creek in DuPont, and now my grandkids do. We go there all the time. They know that trail. They know where it leads, and we bring a picnic. And if you haven't been there, you start at DuPont City Hall, and you go down a canyon. The last 3 miles of Squalichu Creek, which is 38 miles long. It's just extraordinary, and then you meet the Nisqually Reach. It's just phenomenal. Thanks, George. Okay, next. Okay, so there's a lot of successes, including, of course, saving the Nisqually Delta. But the Nisqually tribe purchased 410 acres of the Ken Braggett Farm in Pierce County in 1999, and that's what he wanted. And I got to go on a lot of field trips next, including with the tribe. And this picture I took in 2014. And the dikes, of course, have been removed, restoring the delta to saltwater marsh. And in 2009, over 700 acres of dikes were removed as restoration efforts continue. It's going to take a long time, to get it back. But that's the twin barns there. Mm-hmm. And don't get McAllister Creek mixed up with the river. A lot of folks do. That's McAllister. That's the river. Next. Yep, those field trips were great before the pandemic, and I'm glad I did so much research in the libraries because they all closed down, and that's when people started giving me their files. And my house, my 1914 house, was just filled with people's files, and then I had them all to myself for a long time. But this was what they do is throw the frozen salmon back into the river to show kids the cycle of life. Next. And then these kids were from Roy Elementary, and they were part of the whole water quality testing and projects with South Sound Green. And this is real citizen science that they do, and actually they just had South Sound Green at Evergreen. Almost 500 kids in how many schools throughout the watershed, the Nisqually, Lewis, Chehalis watersheds get together and share their findings and talk about turbidity and pH balance and all that good stuff. Next. And then I'm a member of the Mountaineers, and this group was with the Mountaineers in Rotary. No shortage to leaves out there and keeping the boardwalk safe. So the point of my book also is that, this is a call to action, that it's not just a historic retrospective on the history of saving the Nisqually Delta, but it's what's happening now. And the book is right up to date, right with these hearing examiner cases that are still out. So read it and find out how you can get involved. And at the end, I have actually an appendix of all the selected, organizations involved with Nisqually. So you can just find what works for you. Next. We can't all be in front of a hearing examiner, or we can't be testifying in front of the county meetings and such. But it was in 2018 that I was writing about Squalichu Creek and a series of warehouse proposals that are still being proposed for the 100 feet from Squalichu Creek. So if there's anything that kind of keeps me up at night, it will be that particular case, which you can learn about through the City of DuPont. Go to the website and poke around, and I can tell you later how to get there. Next. And this is Squalichu Creek, and it's a beautiful path, not all paved. It is not wheelchair accessible, but you can take a stroller there, and it's flat. But this is the old narrow gauge railway that the DuPont company used for its explosives to Puget Sound, and then that was taken up, and now it's a path. But this is an endangered area. It is gorgeous. I have a poster back there talking about how the Buffalo Soldiers are interested in retaining this as open space, even though it's contaminated to a certain degree. Don't go off the path, really. Next. But this is my daughter and my grandkids. Last Easter, actually, not this Easter, but last Easter. And the pileated woodpeckers, you see and hear many of them in just one eyeball shot, and it's just a gorgeous trail in any weather. Next. So I do like my aerials, and it really gives a different picture of what's going on. So this is Thurston County today. And there's the Nisqually Delta right there, the upper right. Next. Just another perspective. Those buffers have gotten smaller despite initial assurances. Next. This is the Nisqually Reach, which is part of an aquatic reserve of 15,000 acres. I did speak with Commissioner Commissioner of Public Lands, Dave Updegrove. This would be his department, and gave him a book. There was a proposal to expand the aquatic reserve 5,000 acres in 2019, but I think that went by the wayside with the pandemic. I've yet to kind of pick up what that means and where that's going. Next. This is DuPont. This is Hoffman Hill, Northwest Landing. Hey, maybe some of you live there. Maybe your house is right there. This was a master planned community in the 90s, which I talk about in the book. Next. And then now they have their own specific zoning for warehouses and business, mixed use. This is the trail. Okay, so you start the trail to the lower portion of Squaletou Creek from DuPont City Hall, and it's a great, safe place because you park right between the police station and City Hall. Lots of cameras. But it goes right to Puget Sound, and that's Cal Portland. That's Ketron Island in Puget Sound. Just things look different when you're looking at an aerial, believe me. So the south parcel area that Cal Portland is proposing, it would be in the wooded area. Okay, next. So let's not forget why you're here, because we all love Nisqually. Do we have some birders? Yeah. What is that? Yay. Yep. And then that cutie up there is little pica. Yep. And that's the most studied little critter at Mount Rainier National Park. It's an indicator species for climate change. So it's moving up. Next. Next. Just some winter scene, high tide. It looks different every time you're out there, huh? I took all these, yeah. Next. Kayaking. The bioluminescence is incredible. This was on my birthday in 2018. It's pitch dark. We have a little glow stick on the kayak. Yeah, that's how we see each other. Next. So I'm grateful for my daughter for giving me 2 wonderful grandkids. You didn't think you'd get out without seeing pictures of my grandkids, right? So that's my little one at Lure Beach doing some science, a beach seine. And then that's my other little one at Squaletou Creek. And so my Little Hollywood blog morphed into Little Hollywood Media. That's what I do. Thank you. Next. Lots of thank yous. I took the picture of Billy Frank up there for one of my speech annual meetings, at Traditions downtown in 2011. Again, transcribing what was said there. Also, the point that the Bolt decision came about in 1974, so the tribes didn't have as strong of a voice as they do now. So that's covered in the book. And it was at this event that I luckily transcribed some of those stories about what life was like before the Bolt decision, and some others that I interviewed. Next. So I'd like to close my presentations with a quote by Billy Frank, because there's no end to the relationships or the work. We're the advocates for the salmon, the animals, the birds, the water. We're the advocates for the food chain. We're an advocate for all of society. So what you do is you do what you can in your lifetime. Then that'll go on to another lifetime, then another lifetime, then another. Thank you. Next.
Oh, can you hear me? We are now ready for the Q&A section. If anybody in the audience has a question, we can also wait for some to come in online. But if you do, please raise your hand and I will come over.
Yeah.
I have a question. Is Christy
Guidish.
Is Christy here?
She isn't.
Oh, okay.
I know, but I thank her in every presentation because, if it hadn't been for her wonderful editing, you would have gone down all the rabbit holes I went down. I know, I had all these ideas for sidebars and all this fancy stuff, and she created for me a linear story that's in bite-sized pieces per chapter by chapter. And then I have my one of my caregiving clients to thank for the summaries at the end of each chapter. I had that idea initially, but I thought, oh, that's just dumbing it down or something. But no, by the end of 6 years, the story was getting pretty complicated. And so when he looked through my draft, he 90 years old, amazing. He said, this needs summaries at the end of each chapter. I said, yes. So I have my guy, John, to thank for that.
I forgot to mention, if anyone has any questions, I got to bring the microphone to you first. Sorry.
Yes, I do want to say that I invited former Senator Karen Frazier here to add to the conversation because, of course, she's our former Lacey mayor. But she also, come on up. She also spoke at my first panel discussion at Traditions last December, and I'm going to be having more panel discussions because I don't want it to be just me up here. You all have a lot of memories, and I invite you to share your memories. Many of you have lived in the Nisqually Valley for 60 years or 70 years, but I can go into, during her tenure, what was happening at the time, but I'm glad she's here to give a few words.
Thank you. Well, I mainly want to say thank you for writing this book.
Thank you.
I moved here in early 1967, and the huge battle was going on to save the Delta, and it was of immense proportions. Everybody was involved one way or another, and she just gave a tiny clue, all these events to raise money and do things, and litigation and hearings and meetings and study and on and on and on. So I have on both in Thurston County and in Pierce County, and really in the whole region. So I have long felt there ought to be a book written about this. So I thank you for doing it. It's a big need. And I can remember a few people like Flo Brody. I knew her. And she was, think about the time. This was before computers. It was before people had computers and printers in their house. And big, huge copy machines were still kind of new in offices. Well, Flo had a huge copy machine in her living room. And every chair and table was piled high with papers, for this hearing, that hearing, this litigation, that litigation. She's one of the heroines of this. And then later on, while I was county commissioner, I ended up chairing the Nisqually River Task Force. Jennifer Belcher, state representative, got a bill through the legislature calling for a planning process for the Delta, from the Delta up to Mount Rainier for the whole river basin. And Ecology was supposed to appoint the people on the task force to do the planning. And anyway, they ended up asking me to chair it, but it ended up being a very busy, about a 1.5-year process, very successful, and it's still in place. I think everybody who participated in that one way or another is very pleased. That's still kind of the governing plan for the for the river basin, and including they recommended creation of the Nisqually River Council, which continues and does a great job kind of keeping track of and advocating for the river basin. So anyway, thank you for writing this book.
Thank you. Yep.
Janie, there's a movement to replace the Nisqually Bridge.
Oh, yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about that and what impact it might have on the Delta, and what should citizens be watching?
Yes, that is the number one question I get, and I've added it into my spiel. So I'll just read what I have. But I did run into Representative Andrew Barkus last week when I spoke to the Lacey Chamber of Commerce. And since he's the ranking member on the Transportation Committee, he offered to have coffee with me and speak at maybe a future panel discussion that I'll have. But fill was used to construct I-5 that dams the river. And what we're seeing now is repeated flooding ever since, hindering salmon migration. So WashDOT plans to replace and elevate the bridges with expanded structures, allowing for HOV lanes and bike pedestrian paths. The segment around Mounts Road is also a problem, and realigning McAllister Creek needs to happen, because if you see that, it's looking pretty sad, right? So a planning study is complete with funding secured for preliminary work, but construction funding is still needed. So at least, luckily, the tribe and JBLM and everybody is working together. It sounds like something's going to happen. Karen? Yes.
I've had the opportunity to talk with David Trout, who's the head of the Nisqually Tribe Natural Resources Department, and his big point about this is that by elevating the I-5, you will allow the flow of water. He says the roadway acts as a dam now, and so if you elevate it, then the salt water and the fresh water can mix better and be much better for the juvenile fish.
Did we have another one somewhere here? Or did I imagine that? Nope. Oh.
Obviously, you had to cut a lot just to make one book.
Yeah.
Is there one story that you're like, I really wish I could have got that in there?
I'm really happy with it. But when I'm not being televised, as I told someone, I can let loose with the stories. But I did cherry pick a little story here, though, since we're in Lacey, that, this all happened before there was a comprehensive plan. So it was a free-for-all. And there were joint public hearings with the Thurston County Planning Commission to discuss, going back to the Port of Olympia's zoning request, to make the Nisqually Reach area around Atlas Powder Dock an industrial site. And one of those early voices was Bob Jensen, who later became an assistant attorney general for the State Department of Ecology and Lacey City Council member. And he passed away unexpectedly just a couple of years ago. We were all shocked. But thanks to Bob and some of those early voices, there were over 1,000 members of the Nisqually Delta Association who worked really hard. So it wasn't just the voices, that I included, but my gosh, some of these voices go back to the 60s, so I'm just really glad to have gotten what I did. But then when people come to these events and they tell me that they knew Flo Brody or that Margaret McKinney was their neighbor and she babysat them, oh my gosh, that's just killer. That's great stuff. So I have people come up to me at events all the time. I went to the Billy Frank Jr. Birthday celebration at River Ridge, and I write notes down all the time and encourage people to sign up in the back on my sign-up list just so that I can meet with you later for coffee or something if you've got a story or can add a piece. One guy remembers the day Ken Braggett sold his property to the tribe. He was thrilled. And so just having that firsthand knowledge, that's oral history. So, that's just great. But what I contacted the Aaron Valcho, the Lacey Museum about was that I just couldn't understand where Jones Beach State Park was. And she confirmed for me that that was later renamed Tolmie State Park. Yeah. So the state agency directors were literally at each other's throat after Governor Evans created this land use agency, and they all had competing interests. There's the Department of Commerce, and then there's the Parks and Rec, So I do mention that in the book. So, yeah. And then also, since we're here in Lacey, I want to acknowledge Ken Bosley. Oh my gosh. So Ken and I go way back. And I did use and footnote a couple of his articles from the Lacey Leader that I happen to have at home. But I know the museum that Ken gave his Lacey Leaders to the museum, and they've got all of that. Are they digitized? No. Okay, that's something for a volunteer to do. But again, if it hadn't been for the local journalists there at the time, citizen journalists like Ken, I would not have been able to write this story. So I know my articles that I did for Little Hollywood are being used for history and research now, and it is going to be harder for activists and for book writing and researchers in the future when you see that the ports and others are reducing the amount of time allotted to public comment. But not only that, they only write the name of the person and not the content because they've gotten in trouble or something in mixing up what that person was intending to say or something. So there's an increasing lack of transparency that is very troubling.
I have a little story to share. I'm a retired teacher, and I taught for 31 years at Southworth in Yelm, which is right next to the reservation. I had the delight and honor to teach 2 generations of Nisqually people. And I got involved with the Nisqually River Education Council. I was a 5th grade teacher, and every year we did water testing in the fall and the spring. So these pictures were very familiar, and got involved with the tribe, and they would supply frozen salmon for us, and we would go to places in the environment and put them out so that their nutrients could go into all of the food chains. But I think somebody asked me to help with burying a time capsule, and I think it was about 1991, and it was supposed to be dug up 20 years later, and I forgot all about it. And somebody that knew me from the Nisqually Education Council said, they dug up the time capsule, thank you. And what you said in there came true. And what I said was, this was all still not decided yet about what was going to happen, and restoring the estuary was a big deal. And I said, well, I hope this gets restored and health for the salmon and the ecosystem, and it becomes a model for restoring estuaries in the whole nation. And when they read this letter back to me, I cried.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing.
Yeah, I just want to add to before is just that there's a lot to be done now. We have no media that is particularly reporting on it, but I mentioned in the book that the Thurston County, the sub-area plan for the Nisqually Valley has not been updated since 1992. So that invites encroachment. So we have issues going on right now with the Delta in urban and industrial encroachment, water quality, water quantity issues, and potential encroachment of existing businesses in the Nisqually Valley. So if you want to get involved, just try to pay attention to that in those comprehensive plans.
I add my thanks to Janine. What a contribution you've made to us locally. And I have your book at home, so I could go home and read the answer, perhaps. But I do want to ask you, what were the pressures and the influencers and the logic and the push to breach the dikes?
Salmon.
But
I
guess my understanding is, my thin understanding is it was like the Nisqually Delta Association and Ducks Unlimited, unusual bed partners maybe. Mm-hmm. Is that? Yeah.
Yeah, but like we've said, not so unusual. Yeah, but it's the duck stamps, that first created the refuge. So I'd say the salmon. It always has to be about the salmon. Yeah.
Well, sometimes you don't hear good things happening, but tonight the Land Trust, the Nisqually Land Trust, held a meeting. Excuse me, because it's such a good deal, I cry about it. And Paul Braggett was there too, and his friend. But they thought the Nisqually River had the original fish had gone extinct, and they put in fish hatcheries. Well, the last 3 years, they've been finding these huge fish. You know about that? Huh? How many people know this? The big suckers. They showed a picture,
30
about 3
pound,
feet long.
40 pounders.
They're different color. They're bigger tails, and they think the original fish are coming back.
Yeah.
Thank you. Final questions or comments before we close? Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank
you. And thank you, everybody, for sharing and your questions. And thank you, Janine, for a really amazing presentation. We really appreciate you being here tonight. And we really hope we'll see some of you at our next month History Talk, our last talk for the season. So we would love to see you there. Oh, well, yep.
Right there. Yeah. And also,
it's going to be here.
Here. But
you
also
guys,
downtown, Last Word Books, Orca, at the refuge, browsers. Yes, I take it all. My daughter taught me Venmo and Square.
So please feel free to go look at what Janine has set up over there and buy the book if you would like.
Thank you.
Thank you again. We appreciate it. Have a good rest of your evening. Bye.